Hello and welcome to June 2023's edition of Trache Talk. This is the podcast where we have a deep dive into the literature that's caught my eye in the medical press around tracheostomy care. There's summaries of the papers in the accompanying resources on the website, and some of the papers you can access for free if you want to take a deeper dive. A few different topics this month. We're going to have a look at long-term respiratory support in low resource settings, the importance of high quality patient education, and looking at different technologies that can help our patients with their secretions. Let's dive straight in with a look at long-term CPAP for children with tracheostomies and tracheomalacia. This comes from Mediheal University in Bangkok in Thailand, and it's published in Frontiers in Pediatrics. What the team here do is report their 20-year experience of using modified adult sleep apnea CPAP devices connected to the tracheostomy as a form of long-term invasive ventilatory support for children with severe tracheobronchiomalacia. Now, they describe their own setting as a resource-limited setting because you would imagine that children who have this problem, which is where the structure of your trachea, your windpipe or your major bronchi is not very rigid, they're very floppy. You need long-term positive pressure, usually from a ventilator, to try and keep those airways sort of held open. So what they described is, due to the financial constraints they have, they used the sort of masks that are commonly used in adults who have sleep apnea. And these are usually non-invasive systems. That means it's not actually in the patient, it's on the patient. So in CPAP settings, it's a mask that applies to the face, and it provides CPAP is continuous positive airway pressure. It's a flow of gas that tries to build up some pressure in your mouth and then therefore in your lungs via your trachea to help keep everything splintered open. So they adapted these machines and used them in invasive home ventilation for 15 children with this problem. They found that the approach was feasible, and long-term follow-up ranged all the way up to nearly 19 years. There were no complications related to CPAP malfunction. They did manage to get 1/3 of the children successfully weaned off CPAP, but the 1-year readmission rate was pretty high at 66%, and that was mainly due to lower respiratory tract infections or pneumonias. And the take-home message of this is that in resource-poor settings where home mechanical ventilation is ridiculously expensive, a modified sleep apnea CPAP system via tracheostomy is feasible, it's safe, and probably quite cost-effective. So the only caveat here is that you need caregivers who are adequately trained, and you need the kit in the first place. And so this is, I think, quite an innovative approach to providing high quality care to a subset of patients that need them without necessarily having to go for the full Western system of long-term ventilation. So I think the authors should be commended for publishing what they've done. It's a very long series. It's quite a small cohort, but they've shown that it's certainly feasible and it's relatively safe in this population. The next paper is something I was particularly interested in. This is published in the International Journal of Pediatric Otorhinolaryngology. It's authored by Dumas and colleagues, and it comes from the hospital in Istanbul, Turkey, the University of Health Sciences. So they have looked at the quality of YouTube as a source of patient information for pediatric tracheostomy care. Now, if you have been on the NTSP website, you'll notice that we've got a whole load of videos and a whole load of resources around pediatric tracheostomy care, so I was quite intrigued by this. What they did was use something called the Discern score. This is a 16-question tool used to assess the quality and reliability of health information in videos. A higher score indicates better quality. Videos are categorized on their total score, and the categories are usually sort of excellent, which is 63 to 80 points, good, 51 to 62 points, fair or average in the 39 to 50 category, poor, which is 27 to 38, or very poor, which is 16 to 26. So the 16 questions are spread across 3 different sections. Each of the questions is on a 5-point scale, and the total score, as I said, is a sum of all those questions. So the first section is looking at the reliability of the information source. The next section is looking at the specific details of the treatment discussed. And then the next final section looks at the overall quality assessment. So what the team did was they looked at 24 relevant videos that they found. They came out with the overall quality being low, with most videos categorized in the poor category. There was no particular difference in quality found between videos produced by healthcare professionals and those by independent users. The number of views or likes did not correlate with the video's quality, and they felt that indicated that public popularity is not necessarily a measure of the video's quality. And so the authors concluded that YouTube is not a reliable source for high quality, comprehensive information about paediatric tracheostomy care. They said there's an urgent need for healthcare professionals to create captivating and factually accurate video content to satisfy the information needs of caregivers, which I thought was a valid conclusion for what they found, but I was a little bit disappointed that the effort that we've put into our own resources wasn't reflected in a study by someone else. So I had a proper look at what they'd done. So they had identified the top 50 videos that they found by essentially using a search engine to pull up videos about paediatric tracheostomy care. There were 3 of the NTSP videos in their list, but 9 of those videos weren't actually available anymore, so I don't know where they're actually from. The search strategies you use will throw up different results depending on where you are in the world, what browser you're on, and what your history is, and all of those influence what content you will get. So this is a snapshot, but for example, if you searched in the US or the UK or somewhere else in Europe, you get a different result from where you searched in Turkey for this particular paper. However, the NTSP videos were in there and they were rated. I can't see the individual ratings, but I would challenge some of their summaries in that all of the NTSP videos have all been co-developed with patients and families, with expert healthcare professionals. They've been professionally shot and edited and then tested before released with our target audience. And so I'd like to think that the resources that we're pumping out, and certainly others that I'm aware of, are of higher quality than what the sort of sense you get from this particular study. I think it's good to be challenged, and I certainly don't claim any ownership in this tracheostomy information space, but I thought that was a really interesting paper where they've used a recognised tool, but they felt that the overall quality was low. So I guess it's a reminder to those of us that are producing videos that it's a really high standard that we need to try and aspire to, make sure videos are done in the right way with the right content for the right audience. There was a paper we discussed last year which looked at the effect of just watching one high quality video on residents' knowledge in a hospital in the US. And I think if we can get it right, YouTube videos have really high potential for really improving tracheostomy care. Okay, change of subject. Let's move on to a paper published in Laryngoscope by Shikani and colleagues. This is from 2 academic medical centres in the US, and they were comparing 2 different heat and moisturiser exchanges in a crossover study, which means they use one HME and swapped it for another one. Now, an HME is like a filter. So if you breathe out into your hand, it gets warm, it gets wet. The HME filter tries to trap some of that heat and moisture, usually in layers of special like tissue paper. So when you breathe back in through the filter, it picks up some of that moisture and some of that heat and delivers it back into the lungs. They're not terribly effective, but they're certainly better than nothing. And what the group here were looking at was whether different designs of HME had any significant impact on the humidity and then the consequences of improving humidity. Now, if you have a tracheostomy or a laryngectomy, you bypass your natural humidification device on the front of your face called your nose. And so if you're bypassing that partially or completely, then you need to provide additional humidification. The sorts of problems that you see if you don't adequately humidify secretions or gases entering the lungs as the secretions get thick, you can get problems with inflammation in the trachea or in the bronchi. You might have an increased risk of pneumonia because you can't cough stuff up quite so well. And so what these people did was they looked very carefully using bronchoscopy It's a camera down inside the lungs, and they looked at mucosal health, which I think was a really interesting way of looking at it, not just measuring humidity, but measuring the consequences of the humidity. They used two different HME brands. If you want to have a look at what they were, I'll encourage you to have a look at the paper. But one of them delivers what's called laminar flow, and one of them delivered turbulent flow. And so they were very different in their design. What they found that both HMEs significantly improved the indicators of what they called tracheobronchial mucosal health, so evidence of inflammation and mucus production, compared to a non-HME baseline. So what that means is that the patients hadn't been wearing HMEs, and whichever HME you used, it improved the health of your trachea and your health of your lungs. What they found, though, was the one that had turbulent flow outperformed the more traditional laminar flow, linear flow device. There were significantly greater reductions in inflammation and significantly more mucus production. The turbulent HME also demonstrated greater oxygen efficiency, which meant that they were trying to give different levels of oxygen, the different flow rates to the patients, and seeing what was the effect on their oxygen saturation. So they felt that the device performed a lot better across many different domains. Now, they asked the patients what they thought as well, and 90% of patients preferred the turbulent flow HME, the more modern version on the market. So I think the take home here is that turbulent flow HME design is clinically superior based on what they've studied in this paper, and patients seem to like them. Now, whether patients were aware of what was going on inside their lungs, or whether they just felt nicer or they were a nicer colour, we don't know. But certainly regular HME use as opposed to nothing is definitely recommended to optimise pulmonary health in patients with tracheostomies. I think it's a nice reminder that we need to constantly challenge the device industry and say, okay, you've got this thing, can it be any better? If a new thing comes onto the market, we need to evaluate it objectively. And I think by doing things like that in partnership with device companies and clinicians, we can really drive forward standards and improve the care offering that we have. So that concludes our review of the papers that caught my eye in June 2023. Hopefully, as I said, they collectively reinforce the knowledge that we need, the resourcefulness of colleagues trying to improve care, and patient-centred education and device developments in trying to drive care forwards. Thanks for listening to the end. We'd welcome any comments on the social media platforms as ever, and we'll do our best to respond to them. There's lots more information about tracheostomy care on our website, which is tracheostomy.org.uk, with more podcasts, more videos, more information about how to get involved in our work. Please note that the comments and opinions you've just heard are my own, and they don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the organisations for which I work. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.